So school choice could fix a lot of these things. And nationwide, we're seeing raging, surging support for funding students directly. You look at the latest Real Clear Opinion polling on this, for example. Nationwide survey found that between April 2020 and August 2020, just a few months, support for school choice, or what I call funding students directly, jumped by 10 percentage points from 67% in April to 77% in August. And that was among families who had their kids in the public school system. Imagine that. And it's because they're seeing that the public school system's just not there for them this year. People who would have otherwise liked the public school system this year figured out that there's a big problem when you don't have any position of power without having the funding following the child. Funding following the child empowers families to have more of a say. The pandemic has really put a spotlight on this massive power imbalance between the monopoly and individual families. The way that I've put it before is COVID-19 didn't break the public school system. It was already broken. The pandemic simply shined a spotlight on this massive power imbalance and problem that already existed in public education for far too long. And so families are starting to figure out more and more that there's no good reason to fund the system, especially when the buildings are closed, when you can fund these students directly instead. So this makes a lot of sense, right? I think to a lot of the people on the call, and it looks like a huge inconsistency as far as logic is concerned when it comes to the other side, when they support a lot of these other programs that fund people directly, but when it comes to K through 12 education, they don't support it, and it's only because of the power dynamic is different. All of the other industries that fund people directly with these programs don't have a monopoly. Only in K through 12 education does choice threaten that monopoly, because they want to fight really hard to get your children's education dollars, regardless of your choice, regardless of how well families are satisfied with the product. And this year, regardless of whether they even provide the service by opening their doors for instruction. One more example of ridiculousness that happened in this last year that has pushed families over the edge to fight for school choice is that one of the first school districts that did this, I believe, was South Pasadena Unified School District, where they were saying we can't open for in-person instruction because that's too dangerous. Can't open our schools for in-person instruction. It's too dangerous. Our teachers don't want to go into the buildings because they don't want to face the risk. And so we're going to do remote learning only. And let's face it, a lot of these school districts can't call it remote learning if the children are not actually retaining the information. And we've seen all across the nation that children are losing months and months of learning this year because remote learning just hasn't worked really well in the way that the public school has delivered the service. Failure rates have been increasing all across the country, and it's been a total disaster for so many families. But let's call it remote instruction instead. So they said we couldn't do the remote instruction, but they did open the same school buildings for in-person childcare services. Again, why is it okay to have the same buildings open for childcare services, but not for learning? And I started to look further into this. A lot of districts were doing this across the country. And what I found out was they were paying the teachers through the property tax system. And then they were having private sector employees come into the schools while the teachers were staying at home getting paid through property taxes. They're having the private sector employees from the YMCA and other places come in, and the families were having to pay out of pocket in addition to what they already pay through the property tax system, which is essentially a type of extortion on the part of the public school system, because the families had to pay twice. They had to pay through the property tax system, and this year they had to pay for another employee to come in because the other employees weren't willing to do so because they understood that they'd get paid either way. And so the families got the short end of the stick here in South Pasadena and elsewhere. It was great for the employees, right? But now the families had to pay twice for the services that they would have gotten any other school year. The way that I've put it before is that in my view, every single school district should have the choice to reopen or not. And every single teacher and teachers union should have the choice to return to school buildings and work or not. But families need a choice too. And the only way that you're going to do that is to fund the students directly so that they can take their children's education dollars to the provider of the service that works best for them. They can take the money to a private school. It's more than happy to open their doors for in-person instruction. If the public school system works and the remote learning is working well for your child, you should still be able to pick that too. And with school choice, that option is still on the table. You can still take your children's education dollars to the residentially assigned option. That option is absolutely still on the table. But with this whole argument about school choice comes a lot of myths. And I put a link in, and I know I only have a couple of minutes, so I'll just hit on one of the myths in the school choice debate. I actually co-edited a book with the Cato Institute's Neil McCluskey called School Choice Myths, Setting the Record Straight on Education Freedom. I dropped it into the chat if you want to check it out. But one of the biggest myths in this debate is that school choice defunds the public schools. To which I respond, that's absolutely ridiculous. School choice doesn't defund public schools. If anything, public schools, absent a school choice program, defund families. School choice initiatives just take that money and return it to the hands of the rightful owners. And then the families could take it to the public school if they want, but if not, they should be able to take it to whatever education provider works best for them. You would similarly think it would be absolutely ridiculous for someone to say that Pell Grants defund community colleges because they can be used at private religious universities. That just wouldn't make any sense. You would similarly think it would be absolutely ridiculous for someone to say that allowing families to choose their grocery store defunds Safeway. No one would say that because everybody understands that the money doesn't belong to Safeway. It doesn't belong to Walmart either. It belongs to the individual families. Similarly, public education dollars don't belong to any particular institution, private, public, or charter. They belong to the individual child. Education funding is meant for educating children. It should follow them to wherever they're getting an education. Education funding isn't meant for propping up and protecting a government monopoly. And then also families are supporting alternatives like charter schools and private school choice programs and education savings accounts, what I call funding the students directly. There's no good reason to fund the institution when you can fund students directly instead. And families are figuring this out. And hopefully this wind behind the sails of families continues this year and into the future. Thank you so much for having me. But this 2021 might be the year of school choice, perhaps 2022 for California. But we should fund the student, not the system. Thank you so much.